Not everything needs to move forward, and most of the time, we don't even question the need to push it. Not loudly, not urgently, just quietly enough to keep trying. There was no moment where I decided to stop advancing, no clear turning point, no single realization that made me slow down. It was smaller than that. It was consistent. It was quiet. It was subtle. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. I kept going when I needed to. I answered when someone asked. I moved when it made sense. Nothing about me looked paused, and yet there were things inside me that no longer wanted to progress. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly enough to remain where they were. I noticed it in the spaces between decisions. The second where I would usually improve something. The pause where I would normally push myself. The moment where I felt unfinished and didn't try to accelerate it. Those moments didn't feel heavy, not lazy, not resistant, just still. I was still engaged, still responsive, but I wasn't forcing momentum. Thoughts came and stayed without pressure. Some rested where they were, some softened on their own, some remained exactly in place. I could move through an entire day and not feel the need to advance everything inside me. Nothing felt stuck. Nothing felt delayed. It was more like quiet permission to remain, as if I had been pushing every feeling forward. And then, without noticing, I stopped demanding progress from parts of myself that weren't ready. Everything around me stayed the same, but the way I measured movement had shifted. I paid attention to how normal everything still looked. I nodded at the right moments. I laughed when it was expected. I asked the kinds of questions people like to hear. If someone had asked what I was working toward, I would have answered without hesitation. And the answer would have sounded complete. That was the difference. Because inside, not everything needed to evolve. Not everything needed resolution. Not everything needed to be improved. It wasn't avoidance. It wasn't giving up. It was something quieter, a feeling that stillness can be enough. Not because growth doesn't matter, but because not all growth is visible. I tried to notice how often I used to equate movement with progress, how quickly I tried to push discomfort forward, how naturally I tried to turn every pause into action. And now, I didn't. I kept moving through the day, kept speaking, kept participating, but I wasn't forcing every part of me to catch up. I noticed it in repetition, the same people, the same settings, the same familiar exchanges, everything recognizable, yet slower somehow. Not stagnant, not resistant, just unhurried, as if I was present in the room without dragging every emotion toward a future version of itself. I didn't fight it. I didn't try to motivate it. I only noticed that some things were fine where they were, and that awareness changed something, because once you stop demanding forward motion, you begin to experience depth instead of distance. Everything continued as usual. Time moved forward. People spoke. The world kept its rhythm. And I moved within it, aware that not everything inside me needed to match that speed. I noticed it in my own reactions. Not in what I showed, but in what I stopped accelerating afterward. I could leave a conversation and not try to improve it in hindsight, not push it toward clarity, not force closure. Like my thoughts were allowed to remain unfinished without being rushed toward resolution. I noticed it when I looked back on my own day. The schedule made sense. The tasks were ordinary. The conversations were familiar, but I felt slightly calmer inside them, not because everything had advanced, but because nothing was being forced forward. Even simple emotions felt different. What to carry, what to revisit later, what to leave exactly where it was. None of it felt dramatic. It just felt unpressured. I had to choose not to push, instead of assuming everything required motion. And that awareness was new. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a breakthrough. It was quiet. And because it was quiet, it felt stable. But it kept returning, in the same calm way, at the same moments, as if it was reminding me that not all movement is necessary. I started to notice how often I believed forward meant better, a clear outcome, a clear improvement, a clear sense of advancement. When it didn't happen, I didn't panic. I simply allowed it. And that quiet allowance changed the texture of everything. Not the events, not the people, just the way I moved through them and the way I left them. I didn't explain it to anyone. There was nothing to explain. But I carried that stillness with me, quietly, through the same rooms and the same hours, aware that not everything was meant to progress. There was nothing to fix, no obvious delay to correct, no hidden timeline to follow. The pause didn't feel urgent. It didn't demand acceleration. It simply existed alongside everything else. It moved with me in small ways, in the pauses between tasks, in the silence after conversations ended, in the quiet moments before sleep. I let the days continue without pushing them forward. I didn't force myself to evolve faster. I didn't try to hurry understanding. I didn't try to speed up clarity. I let it sit there, quietly, like something that had its own pace. Sometimes I forgot it was there, and then I would notice it again. Not as delay, not as resistance, but as presence. The strange thing was how normal everything still looked. People still spoke the same way. My routine still held together. My life still moved forward. Nothing outside of me suggested that anything had slowed down. And yet, something inside me had stopped rushing. As if a part of my mind had finally understood that not everything requires momentum, not a solution, not a transformation, just space without pressure. The stillness didn't grow stronger. It didn't fade either. It stayed subtle, almost easy to overlook if I chose not to notice it. And maybe that was the point. Not everything needs to move forward. Some things need to rest. They don't demand progress. They don't demand resolution. They simply ask to remain. Not loudly, not urgently, just quietly enough to stay. Nothing around me needed to change. Nothing needed to be accelerated or brought to completion. I didn't need to force advancement to know I was still growing. I simply continued, aware that some parts of me were allowed to stay exactly where they were. Not everything needs to move forward, and that was enough.